That's Aranda for hello. I'm Virginia Trioli and this is Aranda Country, and NAIDOC is celebrating Indigenous language. Tonight Q&A is live from the Araluen Theatre in Alice Springs. Here to answer your questions tonight, businesswoman and Chair of Tourism Central Australia, Dale McIver, Maverick Independent Bob Catter, the Chair of Central Australian Aboriginal Congress and the founder of Children's Ground, William Tilmouth, the Senior Policy Officer for the Central Land Council, Dr Josie Douglas, Labor member for the local seat of Lingiari, Warren Snowdon, and Walpurgis Celtic commentator and Alice Springs councillor, Jacinta Price. Please welcome our panel. Now, Q&A is live on ABC TV and radio at 9:35 Eastern Standard Time. That's 9:05 local time. And you can stream us wherever you are on iView, YouTube, Facebook and Periscope. In a nation that clings to the coast, we are 1,500 kilometres from the sea in any direction, in the iconic centre of Australia. And our first question tonight comes from Dave Battage.
According to the latest census, slow population growth is hurting the local economy. Alice Springs is a vibrant town, offering high wages, low unemployment, affordable housing, outstanding education, no traffic jams, and an exciting family-friendly lifestyle. As economic growth is directly dependent on population growth, what incentives can government offer to attract people from increasingly unaffordable cities to regional communities such as Alice Springs?
Dave, thanks for your question. Let's hear from everyone on the panel. We'll head off from left to right. Dale.
Thank you, and thanks, Dave, for the question. Alice Springs is the most vibrant regional outback town in Australia. For example, one of the best things about living here, coming to Q&A tonight, we probably had a traffic jam and it still only took 5 minutes to get from home with 2 red traffic lights. So you really can't beat that sort of opportunity that we have here. If people want a bit of a life change and a sea change, regional Australia and Alice Springs is definitely an opportunity. I think what government can do is really to get out there and promote the opportunities that are here. There is so many jobs that are advertised here, so many wonderful professions that people can come and fill, and I'd really invite them to promote that to the people in the cities. Come and have a sea change, come to the Outback.
Bob Catter?
I come from Cloncurry, which is also a place a long way from the sea. Fly-in mining was introduced in Queensland when we lost government, and also in Western Australia when the court government lost power. Fly-in mining cost us 2,000 jobs. The privatisation of Telstra, which was then the PMG, privatisation of Norqueb, which is now Ergon, and the privatisation of the railways crippled us with another 2,000 jobs gone. So if those are the things that took the jobs away, then they can also restore those jobs. And if governments are not prepared to bite the bullet and go back to banning fly-in mining, then at least fly in from the nearest towns. And even if you fail to do that, couldn't you provide some sort of financial incentive for living a long way from anywhere, as we are here in Alice Springs?
Okay, let's hear from William. I want to hear right through the panel quickly so we get on some other questions as well. William?
Thanks, Julie. I'm...
Virginia.
Virginia.
So not quite as bad as my Aranda, so that's all right.
I'm a firm believer in homegrown, invest in local communities, develop employment strategies for local people. Fly-in contractors do come and go and you're left with nothing. And so I'm a firm believer that investing in the local economy, in local people, and yeah, you'll get benefit.
So actually making that a policy priority,
I would
that's
think
where
so.
the jobs have to go. Okay. Josie?
In terms of the slow population growth in Alice Springs, well, we know that the Indigenous population is growing. It's a permanent population that calls Alice Springs home, and people don't have a retirement plan to move down south. So there's a fast-growing permanent population, and it's a very young population. And so in terms of services for the population that's permanent and will continue to be calling Alice Springs home, housing. What can government do? Government can provide better housing for local Aboriginal people, and actually social housing for all people who need it in Alice Springs.
Warren Snowdon?
I think Josie's hit it, I think. One of the things we do know is that what we've got here are first-class services. Our hospital is among the best of the regional hospitals in the country. There's no question about that. Our school system's very good. We've got access to some higher education, not enough. I think what we've got to do is promote the idea that Alice Springs is a place to live. And I know from my own family's experience, when our children, two of whom are in the audience this evening, when they left school, they were off. We're not coming back there, mate, they said. Well, they're back. Did you have
to blackmail them?
No, but I think what they actually saw the virtue of coming and living in this town. The cost of living in Sydney or Melbourne in terms of real estate, as you well know, is exorbitant. It's not here. It's high, but relatively speaking, it's not. And so there are real opportunities for young people. Unemployment across the board is low. Okay. So there are real job opportunities, but we need to do more to attract people. And there is an aspect around our town that we need to confront, and that is the need for social housing.
We'll get to all of that a bit later with our questions. Jacinta, Price?
Well, I guess we also need to look at why our population is dwindling and address those issues as well, because we all love Alice Springs. It's a wonderful place to live. It's got a lot of opportunity available to people who love this place and can make their own opportunity here in Alice Springs as well. But we also have to address the issues why is our population decreasing, and we want more people to come to our community. And again, travelling to Alice Springs, that's something that affects us. All the costs, the high costs involved with perhaps relocating, travelling to and from Alice Springs.
And we're going to get to that tonight
other
as well.
Communities as well. But yeah, look, there's a lot of opportunity here. I think in terms of land, I think we're the most landlocked community. We're surrounded by vast amounts of land, but we're landlocked. So we can't look at, it's either look at improving what we've got here or, if we want to build new, there's only a very small opportunity to be able to do that as well.
Jacinta, thank you. Just before you sit down, Dave, you're the General Manager of the Alice Springs Airport, so you've clearly got, a particular business interest in this. What incentives do you think should be offered at a state or federal level?
I think choice and choice for the public. Obviously, we're limited with what airlines do utilise this town and service this town. However, we do support our airlines, and we hope they can, provide more services, in the near future. But it is a restriction.
Dave, thanks so much, and thanks for your question tonight. All right, our next question now comes from Sal Forrest.
Good evening, panel. The pastoral industry is booming around Central Australia and the Barkly region, thanks to strong cattle prices and export markets, even though Indigenous people have some truly terrible memories of this industry's impact on their homes, families and country in recent history. Many also have very good memories and a keen interest in the industry. Remote stations, cattle stations, often rely heavily on unskilled temporary labour rather than the Indigenous people who want to build their homes and their careers out on country. How can Outback businesses and Indigenous people bridge these sorts of gaps to work better together?
Can I start with you, William Tilmouth?
Historically, they were very close-knit in regards to a lot of pastoralists totally depended on the knowledge and the ability of many Aboriginal person to give direction in where the best land was, where the best water was. Technology, through the advent of motorbikes, the helicopters, slowly diminished the need for Aboriginal stockmen. The work decreased. People now live generations with no one having ever been employed permanently, and that's a sad indictment of the results of technology in regards to that relationship.
I know that you and your family have had quite a close connection to the land in that way. Do you believe that kind of knowledge can be re-established and taught again and a younger generation engaged?
Well, we did have in the land that we claimed back, which was an old family, that the Webb family who had been there for years, did have that relationship, and as a result we knew each other quite well. But there's many cases now where those relationships are only known on that employment side, and that's about it. And so it's diminished in a great deal. So, but there are some families that have been there for years who still have very strong connections with Aboriginal people.
Bob Catter, do you have a view on this? Has it been successfully achieved in places in Queensland?
I identify as a blackfella on odd occasions, and I'll identify this time as a blackfella. We are the most land-rich people on earth, we blackfellas in Australia, and we are not allowed to use it. We are not allowed to have a title deed. Now, I think one of the best books I've read in recent memory, and it should have got a Nobel Prize, and was very dubious that he didn't. Why is Peru, Philippines and Egypt the poorest countries on earth? Because they cannot get a title deed. That's what that book is about. You get the title deed, you can create the wealth. Two quick examples, which bear with me for one moment. I'm at an Aboriginal community, I won't mention the name, and a mate of mine comes in, inside centre for the local football team. Hey, Bobby, he said, I want to get some cattle. I got one of those blocks, 30,000 acre block. Yeah. I said, well, you've been to the banks. Banks won't loan you money unless they've got security. So I said, you've been to the government to get title deed? They said, there's no such thing as title deed in blackfella land. And I said, well, there's not. He said, well, what about your legislation? It was overturned. In 1991, every government's promised to restore it. No one's done it.
Okay.
So you can't get a title deed. The other bloke, he'd got 1,000 head together. And of course, everyone in the community claimed they were their cattle. So he just threw his hands up and walked out in the whole thing. Well, that's the situation. We should be rich. We're not, because we can't get a title deed. Why won't government give it to us? I wish I could answer that question.
Thanks, Bob. Josie, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I do. So first of all, you know, there is a really rich relationship between, you know, Aboriginal people working on pastoral properties that goes back generations, and some of those relationships are still strong today. Mm-hmm. But we mustn't forget as well that the pastoral industry also has a history of not paying Aboriginal stockmen appropriate wages.
Well, we heard about the difficult history. So can you think of a way, at least a couple, where those gaps can be bridged, as has been asked?
Well, Central Land Council is working to bridge that gap. So there's a program, the Indigenous Pastoral program, which is providing support to young men and young women who want to find employment in the cattle stations around. And it's a partnership between the NT government, the Department of Primary Industries, the Cattlemen's Association, education departments. So that's how we're trying to bridge the gap, by skilling up and training young people who want a career in that industry.
All right, now remember, if you ever hear any doubtful claims on Q&A tonight, I can't imagine there'd be one, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda, and keep an eye on our Twitter account, RMIT ABC FactCheck, and the Conversation website for the results. Now, the next question comes from Neil Ross.
I'm an employer in Alice Springs. I employ tradespeople and apprentices. Over the years, I've employed Indigenous apprentices, but most have failed to complete their training. The reason for this is lack of support from, the main reason I think is lack of support from family and their peers. So what needs to change for young Indigenous people to hold down meaningful jobs without the fear of being ridiculed or humbugged by their family and friends?
Jacinta Price, can I start with you on that one?
Well, that's one of the things when I discuss cultural reform and the need for, to consider certain aspects of our culture that we may not realise are a hindrance to us. I think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing that we have a great kin connection between our family members, but it can also mean that we're obliged to family members. And it's difficult when family members of yours are dealing with alcohol abuse, and there are no thank yous, there are no pleases, because you're obliged to give whatever it is you have to ensure your family's survival. And it worked really well once upon a time when we were living off the land. Unfortunately, it doesn't work so well with the cash economy. So the incentive for young people to want to maintain a job as soon as they get their paycheck and, family are upon them to share their money with them, well, what incentive is there for a young person to want to hold down that particular job? And so I guess it's got to come from us. Sometimes it's really difficult to say no to family. For Aboriginal people, it'll literally, make you feel sick to have to say no to your family. But unfortunately, in order to get ahead, this is what we have to do to be able to support, our families. I find in my position a lot, I will tell my family if I can support them, I will support them. But if I cannot, I just simply cannot do it because I am also looking after my own children in those sorts of
And how's that gone when you say that? Have you managed to achieve the change that you'd like to see elsewhere?
It's very, very slow. There needs to be a lot more change, and also education. Education in the area of a cash economy, because a lot of Aboriginal people weren't dealing with a cash economy. So having to deal with a cash economy now and get our heads around it. Your regular Australian isn't necessarily all that good at being able to take care of a budget.
William?
It also comes from the opportunities that are created. I mean, just to give you an example in regards to Children's Ground, when we ran Children's Ground in Jabiru, we employed 60 people who never had a job before. They were employed in a whole variety of different ways, whether it was cultural advising on cultural excursions or assisting with teaching children. Congress is another one where our employment is 51% Aboriginal people, with a target of 60 people in regards to Aboriginal employment in the whole structure. When I was at Tarangire as well, there was a large amount of Aboriginal employment right across the board. And this comes from the motivation not only of the people, but also from the organisations and the companies that take that extra yard to ensure that this person is empowered and feel comfortable within their jobs to be able to sustain that. And I don't disagree with Jacinta at all. The pressures of home are extreme, especially when you come from overcrowded, low-income families where there's not a person within that family who's had a job in the last 5 generations, as I just said earlier. So the effort must come and the understanding must come in order to do that. But not all of us can pay our rent in advance, hide our identity, and, keep our relatives away. It's a very hard act to follow, and I totally concur with what Jacinta said. To do that, you run the risk of being ridiculed. But at the end of the day, it's not only the individual's responsibility, it's the organisations, it's the communities.
Okay, let me hear from Dale on this as well. I mean, as an employer, do you have a perspective on this too?
Look, and certainly as a born and bred local in Alice Springs, growing up with this issue that we all sort of face on a day-to-day, no matter what your background is, I think that the challenge that we face is there doesn't seem to be the urgency that's given to these things. We hear, and with all respect to you, Josie, we hear that Central Land Council's doing these things, we hear that Tarangire and these people are sort of doing things, but this issue isn't new. It didn't just start last week or whatever. So I think, government and all these NGOs need to start working together to put some absolute urgency to this. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here with Q&A here in Alice Springs in another 10 years' time talking about exactly the same thing.
Well, Dale, let me just follow up on that. To put some absolute urgency on that, get particular for us right now. What is the thing? What is the policy setting? What is the requirement? I will come back to you that you think might make that change.
Start with the kids. That's where this starts. That's where all the problems that we're facing at the moment. Education with the kids from the moment that they're speaking Aranda, Walpuri, English, whatever language it is. Get in there and get these things happening. We've got NAIDOC this week with Language Matters. Yep. Let's make sure language is mattering to
and William has been speaking to that. I want to hear from others on the panel before we come back to you, Jacinta. Warren?
Well, I've heard what Jacinta and Mr Tilmouth have said, and they bring a particular cultural perspective. But I think if you think about what's been happening in Northern Territory schools, and the importance of education to making sure young people, when they finish school, know what the expectations are, then I think we've got to be saying we need to give more support to programs like Clontarf in schools in the Northern Territory, a STARS program, which is a girls program operating in a number of schools in Darwin and Katherine and Nhulunbuy.
Right.
And it's about right tracks. It's about mentoring young people so that when they finish school, you keep mentoring them. So they finish year 12, they may not get university entrance, but they may have an aspiration for a job somewhere in the local community.
And someone stays connected to them.
Stay connected to them and mentor them through it. Now, I know, Neil, we've had discussions about this in the past, and there has been an issue around people starting a job, working for a number of months or even a year, but ultimately then dropping out of the system.
Okay.
So the supports have got to be ongoing, and that's a really difficult question because the employers normally can't afford to provide the additional resources. Someone else does. It should be government. We can do it through the school system, and we should be able to do it through the post-school system as well.
Josie, do you want to quickly spot in there?
Sure. Well, education is critical, but so is early childhood and universal access to preschool services, which is the case in Alice Springs, but certainly in remote communities, universal access to preschool and early childhood isn't a reality. So in terms of the barrier that you were talking about, I would think that government could offer subsidies so that small businesses is not just putting on one young Aboriginal trainee or apprentice, but there's a smaller cohort of 2 or 3. It's just like with the university sector, and you have your student enclaves where...
And they can sort of support each other.
So I think an issue is, you know, to have more than just one trainee going through, and that needs subsidies.
Very quick follow-up, Jacinta, really tight.
I just want to say that, you know, I think we also need to look at the way the royalties distribution is, because that's not an incentive for people to want to maintain their jobs if they're getting money through royalties and, you know, it's just getting blown these large amounts of money. I think a lot more could be funneled back into communities as well to help do exactly those sorts of things, educate our young.
I'll just jump in there because you know, with the royalties are being used through community development, and a lot of money is being channelled into education, 20-odd million over the last 10 years, I think about 25 million of people's own money that they're investing into education. So royalties, I think it's really misleading and not very accurate to say that royalties are being blown, because we do have a really strong community.
I see it in my own family, it's blown a lot.
Yeah. Well, you know...
We'll move on to our next question. It comes from Valerie Nabananka Patterson.
I am a founding member of the Wallaby Education and Training Trust, a fund set up to invest Wallaby mining royalties into education programs in our Wallaby communities in the Tanami Desert. This week is NAIDOC Week, and the theme is Our Languages Matter. I know that our languages matter, and I have been working as a teacher and literacy worker at Lajamoni School since 1986, helping to teach Wallaby language and literacy to our kids. There have been some good times at Lajamoni School with a strong bilingual program, but there are also teachers and principals who have come in who don't listen to us, Yapa teachers, and don't respect our language and culture. It makes us go weak at the knees and feel really down, and makes us not want to work at the school anymore. What will it take for the Department of Education to work side by side with us and respect our language and culture being taught in our community schools?
Valerie, thank you. Valerie, thanks for that question. For those who might not know, can you explain to us what Yapa is, what Yapa means?
It's Aboriginal people.
Yes, and it's that's right. And the Y and the APY, I guess.
Yes.
No, that's Wallaby.
Different.
Wallaby.
Different language.
So, Warren, can I start with you? Because you're a former teacher, I think.
Ooh, I thought I was too.
Yes.
Not sure what the kids thought. Well, firstly, let me just make the observation, Valerie. I met with some of the community leaders recently, who talked to me about investments they were making in the community more generally around social investments. But Valerie, I think you're referring to the decision which was taken by the former Labor government to effectively close down bilingual education across some schools in the Northern Territory. I think that was a bad mistake. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I've been a supporter of bilingual education since the early 70s, that we need to ensure that communities who want bilingual and cross-cultural education have it as a key and central part of their school. Now that takes buy-in from the school and the school community, but it also, as you rightly point out, needs buy-in from the school leadership. And it should be the case that school leaders, that is the principals and the school community, are working together to get the best possible outcome for the school community. And that means trying to accept and work with the school community, as in your case, and making sure that if there's a demand for bilingual education or more sensitive cultural use of cultural tools in the school, that they're done, that there's respect and safety, cultural safety in the school, and that ought to be done. And it's not something which should cost a great deal of money. It's around what people have in their heads.
Jacinta, what's your view on this? I mean, the idea of buy-in is clearly crucial, and that everyone is actually pushing in the same direction. Is it very common that in school communities they're not?
Look, I don't know if it is or if it isn't. And I know many communities do want their languages, taught and spoken, because you really cannot understand your culture until you understand your language, basically. And look, I think it's really important for those who are really driven to want to have that, to want to have bilingual education. Yes, support them to do that, but also really support our kids to also understand English, because that's what is going to give them their education, take them on to further studies, and give them, the tools to survive in this modern world. But absolutely, language is important. My mother, former minister, fought for the right to be able to use her language in Parliament. Unfortunately, Labor did reject that. And obviously didn't see the importance of that, but it's important from the time they're little until you're grown. And and I think if these children are learning at this young age the importance of who they are and their language, and then we can see that at the other end too when we're adults, I think it's really vital.
William, what's your view on this?
Well, we all know that right across the globe, right around the world, that language holds everything together. Language, whether it's Africa or Japanese or Chinese, language holds everything together in terms of, like with Aboriginal culture, you without language you don't have culture, without language you don't have land, without language you don't have law, without language you don't have kinship. All these things are held together and glued together by language, but in reality there's two worlds that we live in, and we need that one and we need this one in order to progress through life. And that's what Children's Ground is about, is the child is at the centre of all activity, including parents, communities and families. So everything oscillates around the child and satellites around the child, emphasising the need for cultural language. But we also have early childhood educators in there assisting them in numeracy and literacy. And this is right across the, not new to Australia. People have tried this in many ways, and listening to the lady from Lajamanu, and it sounds to me that their frustration comes from the fact that they know what's best for those kids, but no one wants to relinquish control to those people to have agency and say, well, you teach your kids how, and in bilingual education, the best way you know how, and I guarantee they'll have a better success than the system that they got that's prescribing solutions for them.
Well, let me go back to Valerie and put that to you. So, does this come down to individual agency and I guess a kind of a self-determination there at that level in the school as well about how you do your teaching?
Well, it takes a team to make things happen.
And you don't have that unity.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And that's because a lot of non-Aboriginal people come and go. You guys are there permanently. You know what's best for those children. You understand the community. You understand the need for bilingual education.
Well, a lot of our questions actually get to that point, so we'll move on to some of them now. Remember, you can join the discussion on Twitter and on Q&A Extra on Facebook Live and ABC News Radio straight after this program. Our next question comes from Dylan Voller.
There's a great rehab centre here in Alice Springs for young people and at Loves Creek Station called Bushmob. Why can't we have more youth detainees from the juvenile centre to go there where they can work with horses and learn to build instead of sitting in a cell with no rehabilitation?
So it's a centre there where you work with horses and do other kind of rehab rather than going into the rehab centre that, of course, you're at the centre at the centre of that Dondale Youth Detention Centre scandal. Josie, we might start with you on this one.
Well, I agree that we need really good rehabilitation centres in Alice Springs, well, in Tennant Creek as well for young people, and residential facilities. And we know that there are 3 key ingredients that make up a successful rehab centre, and that is access to medical services through a visiting GP, access to psychological services through a psychiatrist or that's therapeutic based, and also social and cultural support. So those 3 things together within a treatment facility where there's genuine partnership between the organisation that's running that treatment facility and your primary healthcare services.
But Dylan's question goes to why more kids can't go to a centre like that, why there aren't more of those centres and why they can't get access to them. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I agree that young people should be accessing these therapeutic-based services with the 2 other things I mentioned, the medical and the psychological support. I don't know the answer to that question, why that's not... Well, I think the reason is because we've had a punitive policy of tough love, and it's... you need both. It can't all be tough. You can't just be, locking kids up without trying to do any rehabilitation.
Well, let's hear from more on Snowdon, because I think there is a territory government here.
There is, and they're supporting Bushmob, and I think Dylan makes a very strong point. The type of rehabilitation service is pretty unique to Central Australia, I might say, and it's something which, as a model, has proven to be very, very effective. And I know that the Northern Territory Government has been putting additional resources into it. I'm not answering for the Northern Territory Government here, but I do think that sort of model, as Josie pointed out, the punitive model just don't work. We know that. Locking kids up is not the answer. Putting people in a position where they're they can't actually have any interaction, no agency, as Mr Tilmouth says, about what's happening to them, being able to control their own lives in even some small way. It can't happen if you're in some lockup somewhere, but you can if you're working with others in a team in the way they do in Bushmob, give people an opportunity which requires them to accept trust. And it's a very different way of dealing with young people than has been traditionally the case. And Bushmob is a very fine example of a program which does work and deserves more resources.
Bob Catter, do you have anything to offer here?
We, the political party to which I belong, Catter's Australian Party, we will be announcing our policy shortly, and there's going to be no more of this stupidity. The cost of a child in detention in Queensland is $580,000 a year. We put in a wild kid and we get back a professional criminal. Oh, geez, that was a great achievement. And putting a kid in a steel cage like an animal, for having gone on a joyride with his big brother because he wasn't game not to, seems to me to be eminently unfair and unjust. So we're going to propose that we go back and give us some credit. Give we blackfellas some credit. Where I come from, we held the British Empire at bay for 60 years. Give us some credit. Well, what we did in the good old days, 200 years ago, was if you played up, you were sent out into the bush and you stayed out in the bush until you were prepared to behave yourself. And the name used in most of the northern tribes was budjika, banishment. Now, you send them out there. Now, what happens to them out there, the sort of thing that has just been talked about by the gentleman that asked the question, clearly that's the direction that you want to be going. To give these kids the skills, not an education. Look, I come from a town where we didn't have a high school. And my brother cousins were foremen in the councils, foremen in the main roads, engine drivers in the railway. 3 of the working mines in Cloncurry were all owned by First Australians. You know, we got by without an education.
All right,
if we had the incentive, a carrot and a stick.
Yep.
But those incentives have been taken away. But I think that the pathway, the old way was the good way, eminently sensible, and it saved us a hell of a lot of money.
Let's see if we can sort of get a slightly modern version of the old way. But Dale, do you have a view on this? I mean, you know, because the law and order issue, which we'll also get to tonight as well, is a confronting issue for any family here, but also for business as well, and for people who want to make a go of it.
Absolutely, and you know, there's no point in sugarcoating it. Yes, we certainly do have some issues with law and order, but I think the great thing about what we've seen in the Alice Springs community is we all want to work together and find a working, viable solution that's going to work for everybody. And you know, locking some kids up, yeah, I think there does need to be some tough love sometimes in some situations where these kids have done some pretty horrible, pretty bad things. But I also think there is a really great opportunity to get out there and teach these kids, teach them some life skills that they can bring into employment. You know, we've just heard that, you know, we have challenges with employment in town. So let's get these troublesome kids, get them out there, teach them some really good life skills, whether it's back to the literacy and numeracy that we touched on earlier. But you know, the Alice Springs community really wants that to happen. So let's get the businesses together. We had a fantastic community meeting a couple of weeks ago here in town, run by a local businessman that wants to see some of these really good viable solutions. Out of that, we've got great working committee now working towards that with government, with the NGOs, with Aboriginal organisations to find some really, really good solutions.
Jacinta?
Yeah. I have to agree with what Dale said. I do believe absolutely there needs to be some form of support through children who have been through sorts of lives that they've been through. You know, if we look at the Indigenous population, most children, well, a lot of Indigenous children have experienced, you know, violence, family violence or some form of trauma at a very young age. And 38% of the Indigenous population are under 15. So we're looking at a huge percentage of Indigenous children in this situation. Now, I have to agree with Dale that I think, you know, for those who commit particularly serious crimes, then there needs to be the punishment that fits. But I also absolutely agree that there needs to be more of a therapeutic approach when we're coming to, you know, dealing with children. And I've had a discussion with my other half recently about the idea of looking at, you know, former servicemen, Indigenous servicemen, and looking at, you know, programs that could be held further out of town and like a boot camp type thing with men like that who, you know, are upstanding men who have served our country, who know what it is to, you know, have an education, to use discipline, and they can be the role models for these young fellas as well, and girls too.
Dylan, I just wanted to come back to you briefly before we move on to the next question, because we learned a fair bit about your very troubled past and some rather violent behaviour by you during the Royal Commission. I just wondered if your life is back on track now and how you're feeling?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah? Do you have some work?
Yeah.
Good.
Can I make
that's good to hear.
Just can I add to the debate is that the trouble is that the way that things are funded, we tend to throw all the money after the damage is done.
Yep.
There's nothing upstream that worked on the prevention of what's happening downstream.
Which we see in the health sector as well.
We forever and a day the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And that's where all the funding goes to, the crisis-driven end, not the preventative end. The curative model down here, not the preventative model upstream. And that's what we need to see.
Our next question comes from Barb Shaw.
Good evening, everyone. 2017 marks 10 years of the Northern Territory intervention, which saw government takeovers of prescribed communities and disempowerment of Aboriginal people. We have not seen any improvements in the lives of Aboriginal men, women, children and their families. The closing of the gap report and the statistics shown that the situation becomes worse. There is more unemployment for our people, increasing numbers of people in our prisons, more children being taken from their families and communities, and rising numbers of young people taking their lives. Do you agree that the Aboriginal people power and control of their lives will be a way forward for our people?
In Queensland, when I was appointed minister, I decided that we would have self-management, that every community in Queensland would elect their own shire council and have complete control. Their powers were much more extensive than an ordinary shire council. They resembled more state government's powers. And there was a lot of scepticism and cynicism, and I represented the most conservative government in Australia, and I convinced that government that that's where we should go. Now, it was remarkable that when you gave people responsibility, that they acted responsibly. Now, in the Northern Territory, that model was never followed. They had complete power, and if nothing else, then 3,000 white fellas who worked in the department that I was the minister for were replaced by black fellas. That in itself was a wonderful thing. And I get criticised by some of the blokes that fought for self-management, and they say, well, it hasn't gone that good in Yarrabah. I said, when I came into this place the first time, I met 23 people that had power. 22 of them were white fellas, and one was a black fella.
All right. Well, let's
please, Virginia, let me finish. 22 of them now are black fellas and not white fellas, and that is the progress that we are after.
Okay, let's get back to the question, which is about following on from the intervention, of course, and self-management and, you know, and power, going back to those communities. Warren Snowdon, we'll hear from you.
Oh, I think, as you well know, I think that the intervention was a disaster. And I think the major reason it was a disaster was it disempowered people. It took away any respect they had for government, because the government decided we're going to bring in the army and we're going to take complete control. We're going to compulsorily acquire leases for townships. We're going to make you do what we want you to do. And it demonised men in a way which is still causing great difficulty for men.
What's the longest shadow from it, in your view?
Oh, I think
that is still the biggest problem in communities.
I think the disempowerment, absolutely. I mean, there's no question. As I travel obviously across the territory a lot, and there wouldn't be any community that hasn't said to me the worst thing that happened in the intervention was the sort of universality of all the applications that were put in place, like the basic card, for example. I had an old bloke who's no longer with us, who lived in Tea Tree. And I was in Tea Tree one day and he said, listen, Warren, I've worked all my bloody life. I've raised a family, I've paid my taxes. I'm 65, I'm on a pension, and now I'm on a basics card. How does that work? So their personal agency was removed from them.
Yeah.
So their ability to be able to make decisions for themselves was absolutely taken away, as it was for whole communities. And I think that was the gravest mistake.
But there's a process you can take to get off the basics card.
It wasn't done with any consultation. Can I finish? It wasn't done with any consultation. There was no hint of any discussion with Aboriginal communities anywhere in the Northern Territory about what the Commonwealth Government intended to do. And as a result, people were very, very hurt by it.
Well, let's hear from Jacinta.
Well, I can take you to a lot of women who feel as though they've been given a voice since that happened. What it did was it put these very dark issues on a national stage that we were not dealing with, which the Labor government sat on, the Little Children Are Sacred report. And what has happened since then is that a lot more women have reported sexual assault, sexual abuse, family violence, children's lives. People have gone, you know what, we need to report what's going on with these kids, and that's what's happened, and that's why we're seeing an increase in that. I wish we'd look at the reasons why, instead of throwing this, blanket approach saying the intervention has caused all this. I can bet you London to a brick that if we didn't have the intervention, we'd probably still be seeing the kids running around this street late at night as we do. We'd still see half the issues that we're seeing, because really we have to take responsibility for them because they're our kids, and we have to be able to do what we need to do. And no amount of money should have to, or lack of money should stop us from wanting to stop women from being killed and children going through what they're going through. It is our responsibility.
So is there evidence that you rely on to argue that people's lives are better as a result of the intervention?
Absolutely. I spoke to my auntie out at Little Sisters Camp yesterday, who told me that she tells whitefellas all the time that the basics card is good for her because, one, it helped her get off alcohol. Two, the women that she knows can fill their fridges up with food for the children. She's able to fill the fridge up with food for the children, and that no one's listening to her, but she says it continually. And it's like the most popular thing to say is, no, basics card is terrible, it's not working. Well, the people that don't like the basics card are those who would prefer to be drinking and using their money for gambling.
Hang on, before you jump in, Warren, I want to hear from Josie, and then we'll come back to you, Barb. Josie, has it improved some lives?
Well, with health, there have been some gains in health, and that was because the money from the intervention was directed into the Aboriginal community controlled health services, and they had control over that money. And so there has been some health gains with the intervention, but it is complete policy failure. It just devastated people's lives. It took away people's control over their own community.
You don't agree with Jacinta that women felt that their voices were being heard?
I think a lot of women did like the basics card and having control, and I have heard that. But I mean, we can't just then take that positive feedback and overlay it across the broad population of the Northern Territory, because there's a lot of people don't.
It's a case of what you choose to do, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But the overlying issue here is that the intervention, whilst bringing in a whole heap of funds that Aboriginal people desperately needed in infrastructure, housing, all those things, totally disempowered the people, because it could have been brought in and said, well, here, let's get the job done, let's upgrade the sewage system, let's upgrade the roads, let's rebuild houses. But instead they did go that one step further and said, you can't live here, you can't do this.
And took control away.
And took control, we want your leases. And all that was unnecessary. That was a case of overkill, that was punitive. And in regards to Dylan's question, the problem is with the reason why there is not those bush facilities that you are asking about is because all the money is thrown at the punitive end. Prisons make big money.
I just want to go, before we move off this question, Barb, you've heard the responses of the panel. Would you like to follow up?
Yeah, at the beginning of the intervention, when the governments went out to communities, less than 50 children were taken away. And now there's more, and it's increasing and it's increasing,
Exactly
and that's
right.
because they are not getting fed right. The basic card and income management was the biggest expenditure of the Northern Territory's intervention, and today it costs $8,000 per person per year to administer, and that $8,000 per person per year can be delivered somewhere else into social services for our men, women and children. As my former employment, yes, I know we have empowered our town camp women here in the Northern Territory in Alice Springs to stand up against family violence. And one of those women are, in fact, one of the ladies from Little Sisters. And then when you look at Dylan's situation, hopefully, with my current employment, we have gone to several communities right throughout Central Australia, the Barkly region, right up through the top end, and nothing has changed.
Okay.
And I'm sure you travel out there with Yamba and you know that there's nothing's changed.
Barb, thanks for, clearly many people have felt this way about the... Thanks so much. We'll have to leave it there, Barb. Sorry, Barb, I've got to leave it there because we've got to move on. Thank you. Josie, did you just want to say something quickly before we move on to the next question? Time is really on the wing.
Well, just in terms of the Little Children Are Sacred report, that was the reason for the intervention. The Commonwealth Government didn't implement any of those recommendations. So that's...
I just think that we're talking about a problem here. We are one community. We're talking about Aboriginal communities. Aboriginal communities need to get together and be empowered, but we also need to work with the broader community because we've got to take ownership, we've got to take control of this problem, and we have to have agency in our lives, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal.
Yeah. Let's just move on.
Let's do it.
Now, just to let you know, on July 24, Q&A is going to be in Melbourne for a high school special with an audience of Year 11 students. And we're also looking for students who can join the panel, answer questions and debate the big issues. So if you have what it takes to mix it on our Q&A with our political leaders, then go to the Q&A website to upload a video. It's a kind of video audition. Now, the next question tonight comes from Matt Patterson.
My wife and I are going on our honeymoon at the end of this month, and it is costing us more money to fly from Alice Springs to Adelaide return than Adelaide to Croatia return. Tourism would be higher and more people would live in Alice Springs if the prices weren't so expensive. Is there anything that can be done to lower the costs?
Clearly the question of the night. And Dale, it's up to you to solve it.
No pressure on that one. Look, it's as a long-term resident of Alice Springs, I feel everybody's pain. As the chairperson of tourism, it's probably one of the single biggest challenges that we do face in this town to try and increase our visitor numbers, ultimately our local economy, because tourism is one of the biggest economic drivers for this township and the reason why a lot of businesses manage to certainly stay open and do really well. It's you know, talking to the airlines, and we had the two major airlines that fly into Alice Springs come and address our tourism board earlier this year.
And what do they say? How do they justify those prices?
Not very well, unfortunately. I understand. They're in business just like I'm in business, just like a lot of people in this room are in business. Why are you in business? To make money. Absolutely. I understand it's a commercial viability. But as Matt said, it's cheaper to fly overseas than it is to get out of Alice Springs. And I'd love to see that the airlines come and justify how they can actually do that.
So you've asked the question, you've got no real justifiable answer.
Commercial viability is the only answer we can get out of them.
Doesn't really mean
and
much.
when we sat at that table and explained to those airlines, we have locals here in Alice Springs that will get in their car, they will drive 450 kilometres from Alice Springs to Uluru to get a cheaper flight. They'll leave their car there and fly back and then drive back. So they'd rather sit in their car for 9 hours than pay these absolutely insane prices.
Warren, is there any reason for this?
Price gouging.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
So what?
I think, sadly, Tiger no longer exists in the form that it did.
It's not just about discount airlines, though.
I know that,
price gouging.
but it is price. I said price gouging, but when Tiger did exist, there was a bit of competition in the market and prices were forced down. And we now no longer have a low-price carrier who flies in and out of Central Australia. So we don't have control over those airlines. They make their choices, they make the decisions, they know they've got a captive market, so they milk us.
So does anyone on the panel have some suggested solution to this or pressure that can be brought to bear on the airlines?
Virginia, I'm having a meeting this week and my son savagely attacked the head of Qantas and the fact that he was given the award for the greatest Australian 3 weeks ago. I know what award I would have given him.
I think it was a Queen's birthday honour you might be referring to.
Just let me finish, please. We're meeting with the trade unions, which have a great say in Mount Isa, and in this case, God bless them. We'll be meeting with the local council and we'll be meeting with state government officials. Now, what we want is to call for expressions of interest in an airline service in Mount Isa, and we will guarantee that airline 72% uplift. Now, I know the cost of flying those aeroplanes. I happen to be very good friends with a number of people that ran corporate operations in North Queensland, and we can come in at less than half the current price. We know that, right? And it's simply a matter of seizing the power and saying, are you going to do it for that, or we'll get someone else in to do it for that?
Okay.
And if you don't like that Qantas, well, I know what you can do with your Qantas.
We'll have to move on to the next question. And our next question tonight comes from Judy Lovell. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you, Virginia. We've heard a lot about tourism as an important driver in the economy in this region, but the industry benefits really seem geared towards institutions. So how will big ticket items like the Aboriginal Art Gallery and Culture Centre in Alice Springs improve the local livelihoods of artists and cultural authorities in remote communities?
So this is a question about the National Indigenous Art Gallery that the NT government wants to set up. I think $50 million has been promised towards that, and they've got a steering committee established already. Dale, do you want to start on that? I mean, look, I'll throw this in, that the so-called Mona effect and what's happened to the Tasmanian economy now because of one art museum is undisputed, and it has fundamentally changed the economy of that state and for the good. Could you argue something similar for a National Indigenous Art Museum?
Look, it's a concept that is well supported by tourism. I think the challenge that we're facing at the moment is the NT government aren't coming and talking to the local tourism industry about it. They're not coming and talking to operators. They're not really talking to the local artists about how this fantastic infrastructure and this fantastic gallery might actually support them. We have asked continuously of the NT government to have a seat at that table, because if we don't have input into this fantastic opportunity, it's going to end up as a white elephant sitting there. So what we need to do is come and talk to the locals, talk to the artists. We've got people that operate art galleries in Alice Springs coming and asking us as the tourism leaders in town, is this in direct competition with my business? Is this going to take away all the visitors to me and be focused there? We don't have the answers. We need the government to come and talk to us, talk to the local people about what's going to work, and then, yeah, it has a great opportunity to be a really good opportunity.
Jacinta?
Look, I think it'd be a fantastic opportunity. You know, I once worked here at Araluen and worked on many of the Desert Mob exhibitions, and one thing that stood out for me was the fact that there was no real place that displayed the artwork of all the wonderful surrounding art centres under Des Arts umbrella. It wasn't there. The only time we got to see that was at the Des Art exhibition, which is once a year, which is a massive draw card in terms of it brings people all over the world, all over the country to see the artwork. I mean, Central Australia is where the art movement began for Aboriginal people in the whole of the country. So it only makes sense that that art centre is here, and I think it will have a wonderful flow-on effect. I think, you know, people will see the artwork in there, just like, you know, you go to Europe and you see the Renaissance paintings and the way it's
all the great masterpieces of, and they are masterpieces of the Central Desert painting movement. They're not here.
Yeah,
they're in Canberra, they're in Sydney, they're in Victoria.
Exactly. So let's get people to come here and look at where it all began, and then that will make them want to go out and purchase even more art and support our art centres and our artists.
Judy, can I just go back to you just quickly and ask, are you sceptical? Are you sceptical that something like that might actually be meaningful for local artists and for the economy as well?
I'm just really interested in how the economics of it works to actually flow back to remote communities, to the artists and the cultural authorities.
No, Bob, we've heard from you on this, so I want to move on to somebody else.
From whom all of this wealth emanates.
Okay. Josie?
Well, I think it'll be a great opportunity, and if local Aboriginal art centres can supply artworks to this, I might add art and culture centre. I think we cannot separate culture from art, and so we need to have further consultations around that.
But the challenge is we have that happening with so many local galleries at the moment. We've got Papunya Tula, we've got Yubu Napa Gallery, we've got so many in town that are already supporting local artists. So we've just got to be careful that we're not doubling up on the great things we already have in town.
Well, it's still at the steering committee stage, so we'll see what the design is that they come up with.
It's also going to be a national art and I would hope culture centre. So it will be opportunities for, Aboriginal groups all over Australia to have exhibitions and cultural performances.
We might get the Telstra Art Award here.
Bring it on.
Warren, did you want to jump in here as well?
I just think it's money for old rope, really, in the end of the day. I think it'll be a boon to the Northern Territory and most particularly Central Australia to make us the national focus, and that can only be a good thing.
You know what? Having a destination museum like that, like Tasmania has now with Mona, that might just bring your flight prices down. if they all start coming, who knows?
Virginia, we have legislation before the Parliament now to stop the white fellas getting in on the bandwagon here. And there's $25 million extra for the people, mostly in the Northern Territory, if that legislation goes through and stops people from overseas doing Aboriginal art and selling it back into Australia.
So
that legislation is before the Parliament now. So please speak to Warren about it.
All right, there's time for just one last question on Q&A tonight, and it comes from Margaret Carew.
Good evening. I'm asking this question on behalf of all the dogs and the birds of Alice Springs. When is the NT going to rein in the free-for-all letting off fireworks every July?
Yes, I arrived here the day after Territory Day, and I have to say the streets were just littered with the detritus of all your explosives and penny bungers, and you guys are wild for this stuff. So who on the panel is standing up for the dogs tonight? Hands up.
I cuddled my dog.
50-50.
Warren, what?
No, well, I raised a family here, like many in the audience, and we enjoyed the opportunity, cracker night, to go out and fire a few bungers. It doesn't mean that I'm not a new age guy at all, but...
I think it does. I think we've got a split audience on this, haven't we? Josie, Josie, where do you stand on this one?
I'd be happy to have it banned. I think it's a waste of money.
I'm almost about to call for a for or against from the audience, but I won't just yet. William?
I'm a bit of both in regards that the dog next door is a real yapper.
Do you have any dogs yourself?
No, I don't.
Okay.
When it's frightened, it will go all night. But the whole thing is that the control on where those fireworks are let off is probably the issue that I'd like to...
Yeah, well, that's very serious. And I was just reading in the news today about how many injuries presented, including a 12-month-old child was injured by one of those crackers the other night. Dale?
Look, it's a very interesting one. I'm a dog owner, and luckily she loved it and fell asleep on the couch, lucky girl. But look, it's a real 50-50. There's certainly problems. I read a very interesting post today from someone that actually put up about what about the yapping dogs that go for the other 364 nights of the year with problems there. So that was an interesting one. But certainly, look, from a visitor economy point of view, the money that is spent by visitors coming into the Territory and in Alice Springs by people from Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, that come in, spend millions and millions of dollars that are left in the local economy, that's only got to be positive as well.
I think you might have to marry together your Territory Cracker Night with your new arts institution. And you got a winner.
Fireworks
show. Right. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, won't you? Dale McIver, Bob Catter, William Tilmouth, Josie Douglas, Warren Snowdon and Jacinta Price. And also this great Central Australian audience, thank you. Remember, you can continue the discussion on Q&A Extra with Tracy Holmes and Ryan Little, the host of NITV's The Point. They're taking comments on ABC News, Radio and Facebook Live just as soon as we finish here. Next week, Q&A will be taking a break, but Tony Jones will be back in 2 weeks with a panel that includes the director of New York's Hayden Planetarium, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Canadian historian and professor of religious studies, John Stackhouse. I'll be up very early on Wednesday morning with ABC News Breakfast, and you all will be too. But for now, that's it. Okay, finished? Colour. Good night.